All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rechakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations unto the Akim I heard pushing his gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is Brother Quanah from the Arizona Great Millstone Camp. Come back at you, Lord will, with that edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And I was ultimately just, meditating, right, on that suffering, right, this straight and narrow path, right, that, we were ultimately called, right, to walk on, right, as you read in Matthew's, the 7th chapter, beginning at the 13th verse, it talks about a straight, right, and narrow path, right, which that word straight, right, ultimately goes back to, right, the definition of position of difficulty, and again, it is difficult, right, it is tough, right, walking on, this straight and narrow path, because this path ultimately, you're going to suffer, right, you're going to be afflicted, you're going to be chastised, right, which is ultimately for our benefit, right, as we read in Hebrews, the 12th chapter, right, that we're not to despise the chastening of the Lord, right, but we're ultimately to, look at it, as a benefit unto us, man, because what it's doing is purging us, purging us of, right, that old man in which we've been walking in, a lot longer, right, and been soaked in, right, this Babylon juice, right, than we have been, soaked in righteousness, right, following the words of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua. So, there's different characteristics and values and morals and whatnot that, are ultimately based off of this world, right, which ultimately lead us, right, if we continue to follow those same characteristics, morals, values, so on and so forth, right, those things will ultimately lead to us being put to death, and, as we continue to walk on this path, right, we're being stripped, right, purged, of those different, wicked morals and values and so on and so forth. In the process, right, it's not a fun process, right? It's not an easy process, right? It's a very rough and tough, process to go through, but yet, right, we still have to go through it, man. And we have to, while we're doing it, keep a good mind towards the Lord Yahweh Bashem Yahushua while going through it, So as I was meditating on that, I was just meditating on Sirach, the 2nd chapter, which I have pulled up right here. This is Sirach 2 and verse 1. It says, "My son, if thou come to serve the Lord, prepare thy soul for temptation," right? And that word temptation goes back, right, to test. And that's exactly what these different sufferings, A144, call all Yabashim Shai, different sufferings and afflictions and chastisements, that's what they are, right? They're ultimately tests, man, and that's really what we have to look at them as, is just that test, Verse 2 it says, "Set thy heart aright and constantly endure," and that's ultimately the name of the game, right? Is to endure, right? Matthew the 24th chapter says, "He that shall be saved," or it's like, "He that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved," and that's what we want to be. We want to be saved, right? Because as we read in 2nd Ezra, the 9th chapter, right, those who ultimately are that have faith, right, that gift of faith, right, and then are proving their faith, in these times, right, those are the ones that are ultimately going to be saved, man, right, which is, the elect of the nation of Israel, right, pursuant to Matthew 24, right, verse 31, right, those are the ones that are going to be saved, and that's the number that we want to be a part of, man, and again, right, as we're reading Colossians, the 3rd chapter, there's certain characteristics that they're going to ultimately be displaying, that's going to lead to their deliverance, which again, right, they have to go through a purging process, right, in order to, acquire the proper characteristics, values, and morals, in order to align with what is spoken of how the elect are going to be moving, right? It says, set thy heart aright and constantly endure. Make not haste in the time of trouble. Because as we go through this, as we walk on this path, man, it's going to be a roller coaster, if you will, right? You're going to have, good times, bad times, You're going to have a lot more bad times than you are good times, man, So we have to, again, continue to trust and believe, in Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai, right? That he's going to allow us, right, to go through these things and to learn the lessons that need to be learned and to apply those lessons so that way we can, be worthy of being delivered, being worthy of being a part of that number, right? Verse 3, it says, cleave unto him and depart not away, that thou mayest be increased at thy last end. Whatsoever is brought upon thee, take cheerfully, take cheerfully, man. Apostle Paul, if I'm not mistaken, it was Apostle Paul. Let's go to Acts, the 5th chapter. And where is that? 34. It was Apostle Peter, right? As it says right here, for Acts 5 and 29. Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey the Most High rather than men. Dropping down, right? Because they were ultimately, preaching, right, Yahweh Shai, right? And they were getting, basically afflicted, and persecuted, right, for preaching Yahweh Shai, which, we're coming into a time where that's, going to be heavy, right? The men of the Lord are going to be persecuted, right, for this for the testimony, right, of Yahweh Shai, and we're seeing it, ultimately being set up, right? It says, and I'll just jump to the point, right? Acts 5 and verse 40, it says, and to him they agreed, and when they had called the apostles, they beat them, right? Beaten them, they commanded that they should not speak in the name of Yahweh Shai, and let them go. And they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. And daily in the temple and in every house they ceased not to teach and preach Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, right? So again, right, whatever state that we are ultimately put in, right, we have to take it cheerfully, man, because you're going to be persecuted. You're going to have, right, losses, right, in this thing, man, right? You might lose, your house or your job, right, your family members, right, for Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai. But again, right, you have to, ultimately, again, right, take it cheerfully when you're, put in that estate, right, put in that position. Apostle Paul also said, right, to be content, right, we have to be content, man, right, with whatever position that we're put in, right, understanding that, it is the will of Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai, and that there's, a lesson to be learned, right, in everything, right. Verse 4 again, right, Sirach 2 and 4, whatsoever is brought upon thee, take cheerfully and be patient when thou art changed to a low estate, right, for gold is tried in the fire, and acceptable men in the furnace of adversity. That's right, man, right? And again, we're going through that, that purging process, which is a very, very tough and rough process, man, right? I want to go into Malachi, the 3rd chapter, right, which ultimately touches on the refiner's fire, which is what we're going through right now, right, walking on this path, right? Malachi 3 and verse 1, it says, behold, I send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And this is ultimately, speaking of John the Baptist, right? But we're coming in the same spirit, right? Preaching repentance, right? Preaching of Yahweh Shai's coming, right? Which is what, John the Baptist, right, ultimately did, right? So we are those messengers, if you will, man, that are preparing the way before Yahweh Shai's coming, right? Warning of his coming and warning of the impending doom, right, that he's ultimately going to bring, right, as well as the deliverance that he's going to bring to those who are a part of his elect, right? It says, and the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith Yahweh of hosts. But who may abide the day of his coming, and who shall stand when he appeareth, for he is like a refiner's fire and like the fuller's soap. Right? It says, and he shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he shall purify the sons of Levi, right? Which the Levites are ultimately the priesthood, right? Which, now, right, the Lord said, what? I make you a nation, right, of kings and priests, right? So it's not just, the Levites that are the priests right now. Now it's, all of the men, right, of the nation of Israel, beginning with the elect, right? It says, and purge them as gold and silver, right? That purging process, right? That they may offer unto the Lord Yahweh by Hashem Yahushai an offering in righteousness, man. So again, we're going through that, that refining process, right? Being purged of those wicked and evil characteristics and values and morals, right? And ultimately replacing them, right, with morals and values, right, and characteristics, right, that ultimately align, right, with how the elect would be, operating and moving, in these times, man. Again, aligning ourselves with the scriptures, aligning ourselves with the words of Yahweh B'Shem El Shai, the law, statutes, commandments, right, which is what we're supposed to be doing in the first place, right? But doing so, again, it's not an easy process, man, right? It's not a fun process, but it's definitely worth it, man, right? Because it's either that, right? It's either you deal with the fire now, or you deal with the fire that's to come, which the fire now, is ultimately, again, it's sufferings, afflictions, it's chastisements, right? Versus the fire that's to come, which is the fire that comes from those ICBM nuclear missiles, which is ultimately destruction, is death, So it's really, it should be, an easy choice, It should be an easy choice, but the route, right, that has to be walked is not an easy one, and we understand that, man. And we, as the scriptures say, right, to count the cost. We're supposed to count the cost, every single day. Do I want to, do I want to go through the fire, or do I want to receive the fire? No, man. We don't want to receive the fire. We want to go through the fire, right? We want to go through the fire, being tried, right, as gold, man. And we understand that as, gold, right, sits, right, that's, ultimately just fresh, came out the earth, man. It's got all that dross, it's got all that, the undesirables, which is that dirt and whatnot on it, maybe other pieces of rock that got stuck to it, as that gold sits in that fire longer and longer and keeps getting pulled out and beaten and put back in there, right, over time, it becomes better, it becomes greater, And that's what we want to be, man, right? We want to be that, that final, product that gets pulled out the fire that has, that's priceless, right? And that's the process, right, that we're going through now, right? Walking in this straight and narrow path. Lord, will we be of that number? Hey, guess what? When we finally get pulled out, man, we're going to be, priceless to the Lord, man. Right? Scriptures talk about the Lord is making up his jewels, man. And when you ultimately go through that process of, creating, jewelry, right? Again, that's a tough process in itself as well, man. Right? You can watch, all these different videos of how they make Cuban links and whatnot, man. Shaving it, beating it, stretching it, twisting it, It's a tough process, man. Right? So all the way around, we understand that walking on this path is not necessarily an easy one, but it's definitely an easy choice to make, man, versus the other option, right, which is being destroyed, man. So just, continue to, again, keep a good mind toward the Lord Yahweh B'Shem El Shai while we're going through this, this process, man, and stay in that fire, man. Stay in that fire, right? Because again, the longer that you're in the fire, the better you come out, and that's ultimately, something that's been, taught, right, and preached, right, beginning with our elder apostles on down, man. We have to go through that fire, man. It's just, again, it's part of, right, walking this straight and narrow path, man. But I didn't want to make this too long. I just ultimately want to touch on it, man. Lord will is edifying. Till next time, I say shalom.